This is the story of Amazing Eddie. Amazing Eddie was very anxious that nobody should find out he was writing plays and poems, so much so that he and his relatives left clues all over his published works to tell everyone that the plays and poems in question were actually written by him. Amazing as Eddie was, it never occurred to him that he didn't actually need a pseudonym, allonym, or any other kind of nym. Lots of books at the time had no name on the cover, so all he had to do was leave his name off. But this never occurred to him. Maybe he was too busy lurking in print shops, showing the compositors how to arrange the prints and ink blots in anagrams, acrostics, triangles or pentagons, or in patterns connected with numerology, John Dee, the Rosicrucians, the Masons, the Knights Templar, old Uncle Arthur Golding and all. Amazing Eddie came up with a pseudonym based on the goddess Pallas Athena, or possibly based on something Gabriel Harvey wrote about him shaking a spear. But Amazing Eddie, by an amazing coincidence, or possibly his divine gift for knowing about every subject in the universe, just happened to pick the name of someone who turned out to be working as an actor in the theatre in which, for some unaccountable reason, he wanted to stage his plays. Amazing Eddie wrote some of the plays when he was a teenager, and they were performed at the court of Queen Elizabeth. But Amazing Eddie somehow made sure that nobody who watched these court performances ever wrote about them, and neither did they get mentioned in court records, nor were any of the manuscripts for these plays found when he died, even though all his whiny begging letters are perfectly preserved. Amazing Eddie was also good at knowing things he couldn't possibly have known, such as who was going to play the parts when the plays were put on for the public. We know this because he actually put their real names in the scripts, and he made sure he slipped in a mention of the village where the actual William Shakespeare's mother lived, and the village where the actual William Shakespeare's uncle and aunt lived, and the very unusual names of a couple of people who lived in Stratford. Amazing Eddie also had a talent for not knowing things you might have expected him to know. For instance, he didn't know that you couldn't go from one landlocked Italian city to another by ship, and that even if there had been canals big enough to carry an actual ship, they wouldn't have been troubled by tides, which the characters bang on about at considerable length. He didn't seem to know that there were canals in Venice, or that Italians weren't called Samson or Abram or Francis, though there were Italian versions of these names, which he must have known, having spent time in Italy. He didn't realize that Milan didn't have an emperor, or that Bohemia didn't have a coast, or that Venice had a doge. Amazing Eddie sometimes had failures of imagination. He had to go to Italy to see a particular painting before he could picture someone wearing a hat, and he couldn't imagine a picture of the siege of Troy without looking at a particular wall painting. And he had to read Beowulf before he realized that someone who was dying might care about how they were remembered after their death. But Amazing Eddie's most impressive talent was his ability to carry on writing long after his own death. Death would usually put an end to the career even of a writer of Amazing Eddie's prodigious talent, but Eddie's corpse was still creating new plays until 1613. In fact, Amazing Zombie Eddie was actually pretty good and wrote some of his best plays after his death in 1604.